Friends, let me welcome you to this, which is the 10th annual Ayn Rand Lecture. I'm Eamon Butler, and I'm director of the Adam Smith Institute. Could I just ask that if you have a phone on you, would you switch it to silent now, please? Thank you. Thank you all for coming on this cold, dark evening. And special thanks to Carl Barney of the Prometheus Foundation, who regrettably can't be with us this evening, but he is the sponsor of this feast. So even though he's not here, I think he deserves a round of applause. The format of the evening is that we have the talk, and then there is time for a few questions, I think. And about 8 o'clock or so, we will adjourn for a stirrup cup in the room where you came in before we close at 9 o'clock. But first, each year at the Adam Smith Institute, we run a Young Writer of the Year competition. And this year, we've decided to give it a Rand theme. And we've asked the question, every aspect of Western culture needs a new code of ethics, a rational ethics, as a precondition of rebirth, wrote Ayn Rand. In what ways would a rational ethics improve Western culture and Western politics? And young people were invited to write essays on that subject. I think the winning entries are in the brochure on your chair. And they show a keen understanding of Rand's philosophy and how it can be applied to the key issues of today. The winning entry for the under-18s, again, unfortunately, the two winners can't be with us this evening, but the winner of the under-18s category is Ethan Penny, and the 18 to 21s winner is Adam Lahoney. Both receive a £250 prize and a big box of market goods, books. Adam will be interning with us at the Adam Smith Institute next year, and we hope that we will get them to a large conference to discuss Ayn Rand's ideas in Colorado next July. So again, even though they can't be here, they've worked very hard on their essays, so I think another round of applause is appropriate. Let me now introduce our guest speaker. The strongest characters in Ayn Rand's novels, such as Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead, are self-motivated, focused entrepreneurs. They have self-esteem. They do not demand handouts from others. They strike out for themselves. They get things done. They improve the world. It's hard to find someone who personifies this spirit more than Luke Johnson. He's one of our most successful entrepreneurs, the founder of Risk Capital Partners, and over the last 20 years, he's written about entrepreneurship in columns in the Sunday Telegraph, the Financial Times, and Sunday Times. He's former chairman of Pizza Express and of Channel 4. He's chairman of the Brighton Pier group and a major owner in Gail's artisan bakeries and Brompton Bicycles. He doesn't claim to be a Rand scholar, but better than most, he understands the practice of entrepreneurship as well as the thinking which is needed to make it work. No one else in society, he writes, creates jobs like entrepreneurs do. They are the real engine of a dynamic economy. It's dynamism that we need in our economy even more than ever just at the moment. We need a growth agenda to encourage entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs, and the prosperity and improvement which they bring. Hence his title tonight, Entrepreneurs, the Last Best Hope. President Bush famously said there's no word in American English for entrepreneur. Well, we have two words in British English for entrepreneur, and those words are Luke Johnson.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the Adam Smith Institute for inviting me here tonight. I do believe entrepreneurs are our last best hope, and that's the simple theme of my talk. I understand it is also, in a sense, what Ayn Rand believed, and I will now expand on why I think this to be true. I've been an entrepreneur of sorts for over 40 years, since the age of 18, when I started a business with student colleagues at Oxford University. And I've been building on the excitement of that startup ever since. But in addition to starting, backing, and developing about 50 businesses over the decades, I've also been studying and partnering with that particular and peculiar breed, entrepreneurs, for decades. I wrote a weekly column in various newspapers which mainly discussed entrepreneurship for around 20 years, and trying to work out what makes them tick, how we can create more of them, why some are successful and others less so, and the impact they have on society is vitally important. They receive limited attention from academic economists, which I think is a grave omission. If we really understood entrepreneurship much better, we would be a wealthier and more dynamic nation. Some say that life is a game. Well, in my experience, nothing else compares to the game of business. It offers the greatest freedom, independence, and control of one's destiny available in the modern world. No other career comes close. Of course, society needs people with many different skills: doctors and detectives, architects and bricklayers, gardeners and barristers, vets and train drivers. The list of vocations is almost endless. But I would argue that entrepreneurs are the prime movers, and hence the initiators of all economic activity, and that undergirds everything else. Someone, or perhaps a team, started every business or organization. Those companies that survive the exit of their founder need leaders, and so I would argue that leaders can be divided into the custodians or the creators. Custodians are stewards of established organizations. Creators build new ones. Each can be a noble pursuit, but I think the more vital players, economically and culturally, are the entrepreneurs who light the spark. Now, I know that society needs both types of leader. Institutions like hospital foundations, universities, large companies, housing associations, professional service partnerships, big charities, academy trusts, local authorities, these structures generally require prudent stewardship. But startups and the organizations of tomorrow demand a different skill set. They are led by risk takers who live to experiment, who can thrive without infrastructure, who want to spend their careers inventing the future. Now, most custodians are sensible people who prefer order to uncertainty, work well within norms and rules, are adept at navigating hierarchy and bureaucracy, and choose scale and stability over innovation. Custodians are proficient at operating in boardrooms, comfortable with consensus decision-making, and unused often to a real sense of urgency. By contrast, creators are less collegiate, more impatient, and enjoy disrupting the status quo. They tend to do well in the chaos of markets and changing technology. They sacrifice security and can cope with failure because they understand that defeat often goes with the territory. They pursue what is frequently a lonely path without the peer support and systems inherent in any larger entity, in the hope of constructing something new. Creators don't only operate in the private sector. There are pioneers in the non-profit sector too. Think of Jimmy Wales, founder of Wikipedia, Brett Wigdorts, founder of Teach First, or Tim Berners-Lee, inventor of the World Wide Web. But mavericks tend to gravitate towards business because their freewheeling tendencies are more acceptable there. Are they more selfish than those who work in the public or charitable sectors? Perhaps. Although I suspect a hunger for autonomy and a desire to express their ideas are greater motivating factors. Well, young adults, there are many in this room, will mostly see big blue-chip organizations as respectable places to develop their careers rather than the precarious prospects of self-employment. Meanwhile, working with existing staff, assets and facilities has all sorts of advantages. Things take time to build, be they human resources, brands, factories, reputations or technology. Traditionally, the academically ableist gravitate towards the custodian roles. By contrast, strivers from outside the well-connected elite, like for example many immigrants, frequently end up working for themselves. But starting from scratch can also avoid old problems. Old institutions can be weighed down by things like historic pension liabilities, outdated IT, lease obligations, redundant constitutions, toxic cultures, and incessant office politics. Many legacy institutions face existential threats thanks to technology and demographic shifts. In industries like traditional media, store-based retailing, oil-based automotive, the oil industry itself, transport and banking, the old models are gradually falling apart. A lot of those big companies are basically in the business of managing decline. Public services such as policing and education are, I would argue, ill-equipped to adapt to the expectations of 21st century citizens. Institutions may be embracing soft issues like diversity, inclusion, and environmentalism, but are they addressing the tougher hazards, how to stay competitive, solvent, and relevant? The next generation of leaders of established organizations can choose. Do they want to manage decline, or can they rise to the challenge and transform legacy structures? Entrepreneurs are usually better at tackling creative destruction, but will the custodian class take the necessary difficult actions? I worry that we are not teaching enough young people about the right skills to be leaders of tomorrow. Business is actually the most popular degree subject in Britain, accounting for almost 350,000 student enrollments in the 2017-18 academic year, more than those taking maths, computer science, or engineering and technology combined. But I wonder how practical those business qualifications will be in the real world of work, particularly working for yourself. Now, new organizations typically lack capital and recognition, yet these absences can be advantages. A dearth of money can bring out the resourcefulness of founders, while too much cash, see WeWork for reference, can be dangerous. The best founders always run their companies in a lean fashion. There is nothing more off-putting than an extravagant entrepreneur running a loss-making business. Far too many of those around at the moment. Meanwhile, having no reputation means startups and their founders can make mistakes quietly and learn from them. Intellectually, I suspect it can be hard for creators to play the part of custodian and vice versa. Partnerships between the two types of personality might be the answer, although there are likely to be clashes, and inevitably only one vision will tend to prevail. I think that being a good custodian of an institution means following the dictum from The Leopard by Lampedusa. If we want things to stay as they are, things will have to change. Now, lots of think tanks, academics, and policymakers believe, not the ASI, I'm glad to say, believe that the way to build a more enterprising nation is through government. Now, lower taxation and more intelligent regulation can help stimulate growth, and sometimes state investment can make a difference. But the underlying reason why some places are more enterprising than others is their culture. People found and develop new companies and launch breakthrough technologies. Cultural shifts are not dictated from Westminster. They blossom from the ground up in homes, classrooms, pubs, labs, factories, and workplaces. Now, unfortunately, there has been an oppressive emphasis on safety and security at any cost since March last year. A fearful and dependent society is highly unlikely to encourage risk takers to stake their savings and futures on new ventures. We must not allow a neurotic attitude of risk aversion to inhibit Britain's entrepreneurial instincts. The national conversation over this last 18 months has been utterly dominated by politicians, academics, doctors, and others, all on the public payroll. Too many of them sign up to concepts like the precautionary principle, because they have minimal interest or indeed understanding of the private sector. But without a business and industrial revival, the state will be unable to pay their salaries and pensions and all the other bills left over. And business and entrepreneurship has freedom at its very core. Freedom to fail, freedom to innovate, freedom to challenge state monopolies, freedom to grow and to please customers. This means more than just permission to trade. It is a mindset, an attitude, and a way of life. It means avoiding dependency and entitlement and victimhood, and embracing change and proportionate risk. Now, there are signs of optimism. New business formations remarkably grew by 14% last year to a record 772,000. The animal spirits of entrepreneurship are, I believe, irrepressible, and they will always see opportunity, even in the darkest times. Indeed, it may be that more people will be encouraged to start their own business as part of the dread phrase, new normal. Perhaps they've been made redundant. Possibly they have reassessed their priorities and have decided that the freedom and independence that comes from working for yourself matters more than the apparent comforts of employment. Now, being your own boss is a way of life and a philosophy. It can provide a satisfaction which I would argue no other career can match. And in the years ahead, Britain will need their fierce ambition, brilliant ideas, hard work, and sheer confidence like never before. There is much to be done. We well understand the task ahead. Let us hope that the founders, the risk takers, and the adventurers seize the moment and lead us into the sunlit uplands. Now, there are plenty of reasons why certain individuals are unsuited to becoming entrepreneurs. Starting a business involves risk and hard work. If you need security and prefer predictability in your career, then I would suggest self-employment is not for you. If you are unwilling to spend evenings, weekends, and holidays working, forget it. If you are poor at adapting to change and don't want to shoulder responsibility, then the same thing applies. Stress is almost guaranteed for anyone doing a startup. And if that prospect scares you, then it's better that you take a safe job in the public sector. Some are lulled into thinking that entrepreneurship is all excitement. In fact, much of it is dull grind, and generally it is a long-term commitment needing dedication, patience, and the ability to avoid distractions. Typically, it involves periods of 7 days a week working, and even 15-hour workdays. All the successful partners with whom I've partnered have made significant sacrifices in their life to pursue their dreams. Many have deferred holidays, put off buying a home, or even starting a family. I did the same myself. I didn't get married till I was in my 40s, in order to devote all their capital and energy to their business. Generally, starting a new venture as a side hustle or a part-time enterprise means it never takes off. Such undertakings only become serious when you go all in and place an all-consuming wager on your future. Now, unfortunately, most new businesses generate minimal income for their proprietors in their early stages. So anyone thinking of becoming an entrepreneur needs to calculate if they have enough money to survive this phase, which might last a year or several years. Realistically, it is worth doing the calculation to decide if it is for you worth foregoing the additional earnings which you would receive in a job. Quite a few entrepreneurs earn less than the national living wage, would you believe? So entrepreneurship is not automatically about making a fortune, at least in the initial stages of the game. I come across plenty of professionals in banking, law, accountancy, and so forth, who can never really afford to leave their institution because they are so well compensated. And they have built up such large personal overheads, such as mortgage payments, school fees, and the rest. Sensibly enough in the circumstances, they are unwilling to diminish their lifestyle significantly to chase after a high-risk ambition, which might all end in disappointment anyhow. Yet starting a business is surprisingly fashionable. 5 million people in Britain now work for themselves. I hope they all do well and enjoy the freedom that comes from working without a boss. But inevitably, many enterprises will fold, or at least fall short of the promises envisaged by their creators. Now, there are compromise avenues, such as freelancing and franchising, which can reduce the challenges and hedge the risks, but everyone who works for themselves, in whatever format, must possess buckets of resilience and accept that the entire undertaking might prove a waste of time and money. Many of the brightest, best qualified young people shun this risky life of being an entrepreneur for safer gigs like law or management consultancy and big company finance. Now, I don't think these offer much adventure, but they are considered prestigious, and you can mix with the elite and become part of the establishment. Your career is highly structured, your downside limited. The opportunity to be creative and really add value is diminished, but not everyone is suited to being a revolutionary. In truth, most who prosper as entrepreneurs do it because for them there is no alternative. They feel a compulsion to forge their own path and take control of their future. They cannot bear the idea of being a mere cog in a large machine. Frequently, they accept a lower overall standard of living than they would otherwise have enjoyed by taking orders from an employer, comfy in a steady job. They take the plunge into the choppy waters of entrepreneurship because they enjoy adventure, because they must chase a vision, and they have the self-confidence to ignore all the threats and negatives. It is not the right decision for the majority and will only lead to unhappiness and failure for those who are not committed, heart and soul. Now, you will all know, as Ayn Rand did, that entrepreneurs fulfill a number of profoundly important economic roles in a capitalist system. They found businesses which introduce new products and services and create innovations. Often, they are not the James Dyson inventor, but the Steve Jobs figure, the promoter and organizer who finds the funding, recruits the team, and has the vision to make the whole enterprise happen. In all this whirlwind of activity, they create jobs as a byproduct, they generate exports, they pay taxes, and bluntly, they fund the public sector. Without them, we would be poorer in every aspect of our lives. And without their dynamism and disruption, society would stagnate. Command economies never innovate successfully. They collapse because their leaders fail to understand human motivation and the brilliant chaos of free markets. Hence, Venezuela, with the world's greatest oil wealth, has descended into abject poverty, corruption, and violence over the last 3 decades under its demented socialist leadership. But in addition to the utterly irreplaceable economic contribution from entrepreneurs, in recent times, I have become convinced that entrepreneurs may help fulfill other roles. In particular, they can play a part, I believe, in the culture wars. Over the last few decades, many of the crucial institutions in the Western world have been hollowed out by the social justice warriors. Schools, universities, the justice system, charities, the civil service, indeed much of the public sector, I would argue. However, it's worse than this. Many large companies are now closer to government than they are to free enterprise. They are too often run by cowards who prefer virtue signaling to standing up for business. They mostly rely on legacy franchises, frequently enjoying oligopolies, and are sometimes addicted to crony capitalism. Too many have given up on productive research and development. They find it easier to acquire growth than experiment with new ideas themselves. Whether it comes to lockdowns, the woke agenda, or climate change, big business bosses are far more worked up about complying with every single ESG mandate than whether they deliver for their shareholders, suppliers, staff, or customers. So many leaders are in constant fear of their millennial workforce, afraid of bad publicity and legal claims. They are obsessed about their reputations, throwing any executive overboard from the slowly sinking ship for the slightest offense. Loyalty means nothing. What a depressing existence. I pity those who cannot express their genuine opinions publicly or dissent from the groupthink which so pervades our times, because they worry that they will be demonized at work or even lose their job if they say the wrong thing. Free speech is almost absent when it comes to the captains of industry. Their highly paid PR advisors tell them to stick to safe subjects and spout insincere verbiage. Mostly, these characters have very little real skin in the game. They rarely risk their own capital, but instead receive bloated salaries, one-way bet options, and juicy employment contracts. These are not defenders of the profit motive or the value which industry delivers in almost every aspect of life. Instead, they are almost free riders, while boards are full of non-executive directors who tick the right boxes, but are essentially Christmas tree decorations, as Tiny Rowland described them. Now, in my experience, many large organizations tend to be riven with bureaucracy and office politics. Any animal spirits have long ago departed the corporate body. Instead, safetyism has taken hold, and deadly concepts like the precautionary principle adopted as an overriding philosophy. The craven way bosses all complied and never complained about universal lockdowns, instead just sticking their collective hands out for government bungs, was pretty pathetic to witness. Almost no one in big business had the courage to ever question the arbitrary mandates over lockdowns, social distancing, the relentless government fear propaganda, masks, hand sanitizers, and all the other so-called science. We are now dealing with the 2.2 trillion and rising debt overhang, the raging inflation, the logistical dislocations, the dissipation of the work ethic, the crazed panics like the so-called recent petrol crisis, and the 7 million odd waiting for procedures or appointments on the NHS. Now, by their very nature, many entrepreneurs are contrarians. They avoid the crowd and instead plough their own furrow. They are happy to let their customers ultimately decide if their offering is an ingenious breakthrough or a flop. Unlike the brutal monopoly of the state, they thrive on competition. Choice allows new rivals to constantly usurp any operator doing a mediocre job. Improve on an incumbent and the rewards are considerable. And the public are the beneficiaries of this wonderful process. Now, I'm not suggesting an army of entrepreneurs suddenly switch careers and enter politics. Working with legacy institutions like the Conservative Party or government ministries isn't likely to pay to their strengths, even if they could get elected to public office. But I do think more entrepreneurs could enter public life in other ways, firstly giving their riches away to the right causes, advising the right politicians, and founding and funding social enterprises which can make a difference. Self-made men and women are not always very creative when it comes to actually using their wealth. They should be the very first to step up to defend free enterprise, free speech, and free association, all of which are under assault from the deadly trifecta of lockdown, woke, and the zero carbon cults. Of course, entrepreneurs tend to be pretty busy building their companies and getting rich. But at some point, most sell out, at least in part. And then they can engage in the vital philosophical and intellectual debates of our time. This doesn't have to be about traditional subjects they support, like small government, proportionate regulation, and low tax. They all still matter, but the culture wars are much broader now. Basic freedoms are under attack on a much wider front, and the entrepreneurial classes should not stand by as mere spectators. They need to actively participate and prevent political ideologies distorting science in areas like public health and climate change, and stop the endless march of safetyism, which is threatening to dominate our waking hours. Of course, there are other urgent causes where entrepreneurs could lend a hand. Getting more homes built, for example. No issue is more pressing for people under the age of 45 in this country. They should have the ability to own their own home, and the millions more need to be built. We need a better planning system and fewer opportunities for NIMBYs to block development. We also need more small house builders and more ingenious ways of constructing homes which are fit for purpose. Now, there have been huge revolutions in sectors like retailing and communications, but we also need more advances in industries like energy and transport and agriculture and construction and medicine. Scientists may produce the technology, but it needs entrepreneurs to commercialize it. I'm confident each generation produces plenty of ambitious, energetic, persistent grafters who do whatever it takes, within the law of course, to fulfill their plans and bring their ventures to life. The world seems awash with capital, so there is more backing now from schemes of every description than ever in history. No doubt much money is being misallocated, but I hope the vast explosion in venture capital will deliver exciting results for mankind. Luckily, the lust for glory springs eternal, and no doubt as we sit here, thrilling new undertakings are afoot, not just in Silicon Valley, but in many newer hotbeds of innovation across many Western economies. Now, of course, entrepreneurs as a breed are flawed because man is fallen. They are not heroes who single-handedly build giant firms. They rely on partners of every description, be they actual business partners, bankers, investors, staff, suppliers, early customers, or even the government. Entrepreneurs are also very diverse. They come from every class, faith, culture, sex, ethnicity, country, and every age group. The single thread which binds them is a burning desire to be their own boss and pursue a dream. More often than not, their journey is not stimulated simply by a hunger to make a fortune. Rather, it is spurred by yearning to devise a solution to a problem, or to prove their detractors wrong, or to improve on a competitor's product, or to leave a legacy, or some other psychological impulse. Now, you will have detected I am just slightly biased. I say to almost every young person I meet, including a number this evening, which are wondering what to do with their life, start a business. As I've said, the life doesn't suit everyone, but in terms of the satisfactions, it's hard to beat. From my observations of self-made men and women over 30 years in business, I've frequently noticed how many actually disliked school and never attended university even. Some are dyslexic, some simply hated taking directions from teachers. Others were impatient to leave the theory of the classroom behind because they wanted to charge out in the real world and earn money. Now, I can recall the loneliness I felt in my late 20s when I left the comfort blanket of employment to become a full-time entrepreneur. It seemed like a wilderness. No structure, no salary, no job description, no real advantages. I'd walked away from a respectable middle-class occupation, not very far from here, stockbroking, to pursue some half-mad dream of independence, searching for direction and a more satisfying way of life. Now, I blundered around, but in time I stumbled across a pathway, confirming my belief that controlling one's destiny is what counted. Now, by that right, those who attend elite schools and universities should be endowed with the skills and qualifications that enable them to conquer any field. But in my experience, they frequently suffer from the defect of overconfidence. So often, they possess a sense of entitlement which severely undermines their career ambitions. Moreover, I'm constantly impressed at how entrepreneurs who started working at 18 are still willing to keep learning even into their 40s and 50s. Their very lack of exam certificates means they listen to advice rather than thinking that they know it all already. Sometimes a measure of insecurity can be a valuable trait. Certainly, a sense of hunger is an absolute requirement for anyone who wants to make it. The powerful longing for success is usually sparked by early difficulties and disadvantages, rather than the comfortable background. Many titans of business suffered tragedy and upheaval in their childhood, from the premature death of a parent to family bankruptcy. A capacity for industry and a drive to overcome obstacles are frequently forged at a young age. The very language we use to describe business risk takers can be tinged with snobbery and disapproval, because this path is generally not the favoured one for those who come from nice homes with educated parents. Take the word opportunist. It usually carries negative connotations, yet it perfectly sums up the essence of the entrepreneur, someone who seizes commercial opportunities. Similarly, the phrase chancer is normally used in a derogatory fashion. Yet what is a business founder but someone who takes a chance with a new venture? Perhaps money-making is a unique talent which qualifies those who have it for nothing else on earth. Some are so consumed by the desire to create fortunes that all their other interests are mere distractions. High achievers across many disciplines are marked by long-term commitment to their calling and great powers of concentration. And I would say entrepreneurs are no different. Now, entrepreneurs are usually not very reflective or contemplative personalities. They prefer action to discussion or procrastination. The legendary $2 Charles Shaw wine is sold in a US chain called Trader Joe's Supermarket, known as $2 Chucks. It's made by a chap called Fred Franzia. He rejects the pretentiousness of many winemakers, saying, We buy wineries from guys from Stanford who go bankrupt. Some real dumbasses from there. His private business, meanwhile, has revenues of $500 million, and he still works 100-hour weeks, my kind of entrepreneur. Now, I love business because for its practitioners, it offers endless adventure and limitless possibilities. There is nothing in life more engaging than coming across an electrifying new commercial opportunity and suddenly visualizing how you might seize the moment and turn this idea into something concrete and profitable. Even after 40 years of starting and backing companies, I never fail to be inspired when I light upon some clever innovation invented by some brilliant founders. These improvements are what is called progress. Private enterprise is responsible for the vast majority of countless advances consumers see every week. Ingenious new products and services which provide a better way to do things and a higher standard of living, the material comforts we all enjoy. I like business because it's a relentless contest, every firm pitting its resources against all manner of competitors. Out of this struggle, the fittest survive, and society is the chief beneficiary. I find this challenge intellectually stimulating, especially since business is not a zero-sum game. There can be many winners, especially customers. As Walter Bagehot wrote, business is really more agreeable than pleasure. It interests the whole mind, the aggregate nature of man more continuously and more deeply. Often in business, you embark upon very complex arrangements, organizing, administering, motivating, and recruiting, which prove mentally stretching, launching a new product, say, or opening a new restaurant or plant. A business with which I'm involved recently moved to big new premises. Seeing the operation up and running in its new home, machines and employees busy producing goods, was a really thrilling sight, a marvel of coordination and stamina. It made me intensely proud to be playing a small part in such an exhilarating undertaking. I like trade because it is open-minded and classless. Background, accent, schooling, academic achievement, social standing, these count for nothing, unlike in many walks of life. Entrepreneurs are a more diverse lot than professions like the law or journalism. According to the Harris poll, Americans consider many occupations more prestigious than business: firefighters, nurses, architects, and so forth. Yet the private sector generates all the net taxes to pay the bills for our public services. So even if they do not garner so much prestige, businessmen and women enable welfare, education, justice, and healthcare systems to function. Business is a practical activity. If you sell shoddy items or provide bad service, then you are likely to go bust. The market is unforgiving, but real, not theoretical, in its verdicts and outcomes. Building a business offers many rewards beyond the pecuniary. At heart, it is a creative endeavor, just as much, I would argue, as any artistic pursuit. Assembling all the elements which make up a productive firm, people, capital, property, technology, target market, and so forth, is an intricate task which requires both mental exertion and gut feel. Cultivating a management team is one of the most satisfying byproducts of growing a business. Watching talent develop and take on new responsibilities and succeed in their careers is hugely life-affirming. Ultimately, the greatest good that entrepreneurs do is to generate jobs. To obtain decent work is citizens' most fundamental desire all around the world, according to the pollsters Gallup. And the scope of business is boundless. It impacts every nation, every discipline. It accommodates organizations from the smallest to the largest. It gives constant support to philosophy of lifelong learning. It embraces cutting-edge scientific applications and rewards intuitive skills of persuasion and charisma. Almost all respected careers are hidebound by stifling hierarchy. But when you start your own business, there need be no such rigmarole. You control your destiny, and you take the just credit for your own efforts. And being part of a booming business is a truly thrilling experience. Beating sales forecasts, making record levels of profits, hiring more staff, investing for the future, attracting the best people. There is a virtuous circle which can apply when things go well. Of course, managing a business in a capitalist system is not a risk-free affair. Failure is always a hazard. I think of entrepreneurship as much more than just work, but as a vocation, even a calling. It is dynamic, testing, varied, and limited only by our imagination and ambitions. Society needs more entrepreneurs, big and small, to help retain our freedoms and build the future. I salute every one of them. Thank you for listening.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've just had a fantastic window into the mind of an entrepreneur. We have a few minutes for questions. We have a couple of microphones which we need to use so that you end up on the tape. We'll start at the front, just there. Morgan. Thank you very much.
Would you like me to stand up or not? Okay.
If you like. All I ask is you keep your questions brief, and you only have one question.
Mr. Johnson, thank you for such a tour de force. You of course, are an English entrepreneur within an English democratic system. We're coming up against cultures like China in the East, who are dynamic entrepreneurs within a dictatorial system. Would you care to say something you think how much government affects the culture of capitalism?
Well, as I said in my talk, I do think that culture is derived from the people rather than laws and lawmakers. And I think it is up to us as a nation, as a people, to decide, what our priorities are. I do worry that over the last 2 years, it seems a lot of people have sacrificed liberty for safety. And with liberty and freedom comes not just the right to go to work, but the right to create businesses and generate prosperity. And I think we sacrifice our freedoms in every sense. It's a very dangerous and slippery path. And I hope that this theory that, command and control economies are successful at dealing with the modern world's problems doesn't become a widespread belief, because I think it is wrong and dangerous.
Yes, can we go there? Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you again, Mr. Johnson. Gordon Kerr, Brompton Partners. You mentioned the command control massive increase in public debt, 2 trillion. You didn't mention the banking crisis, 2007 to 2008. But would you not agree that there must be some serious problems in the future of our fiat money system with such massive debts and zero interest rates? And do you as an entrepreneur ever take any precautionary contingency plans for those kinds of events?
Well, I think it's not easy, is it? I mean, one can worry about big picture stuff, and I do mention some of it in the speech. However, in the real world, I think, you will keep yourself up all night, every night, if you lie awake thinking about inflation or fiat money. I think, most of the businesses I've generally been involved with have been prudently financed themselves, and that's clearly one thing you can do. And, try and take sensible, proportionate risks in your businesses. But if, the government goes bonkers, or is corrupt, then it's very difficult for individual business people to do much, except perhaps, as I say, get more actively involved in public life in trying to find sensible politicians and political parties which will defend and protect the rights of business and free enterprise to trade. One thing I would say is that, I've done business in a number of other countries, and for all its flaws, actually rule of law and property rights and things here do apply, unlike the vast majority of the world, where they're pretty fast and loose. So things could be much worse.
I saw somebody else in this group. Sorry for all you lot, I veer to the right, There's somebody else there. Yeah, there we go.
You mentioned the wokeism of the managerial class, but they don't operate in a vacuum. They're responding to incentives, sometimes from investors, sometimes from the selection committee of their next job that's targeting. What do you think investors can do better to curb this sort of behavior?
It's a very tough one. I worry that, you know, a lot of the institutional investors that I've spoken to in recent times have become very fixated on, you know, the ECG agenda, for example, and not on, you know, whether the company they're investing in is well managed or producing a decent return or innovating or investing in research and development or creating jobs or all those other utterly vital things that, you know, it's dangerous to take for granted. I think probably, like many people working in large organizations, more fund managers should, at some point in their careers, try running a business. And then I think they will be much more empathetic and understanding of what matters, rather than box ticking, which I think is a lot of what goes on now in the big institutional investment houses.
Should we recruit entrepreneurs from business, or does that just not work?
Well, I think it can. You know, I think there should be more crossover between big business and investment houses and the entrepreneurship community. Unfortunately, you know, they're like church and state, and they very rarely mix. And I think one of the disadvantages, perhaps, of things like the House of Parliament, for example, in Whitehall, is that very, very few people in those worlds have ever worked for themselves. So the whole understanding of the entrepreneurial class is absent.
Very few of them have worked outside the public sector, rather. I'm going to follow fashionable trends and drift to the left. And I saw Martin. Could you stand up, Martin, so they can get a microphone to you? Martin Durkin. No, microphone.
Thanks. Luke, you're chairman of Channel 4. To what extent do you think the state controlled or sort of soft state control of the media and state control of education, of schools, acts as a dampening effect on the entrepreneurial spirit of young people?
Well, yes, I mean, I think it is extraordinary the extent to which in many of the major broadcasting organizations, for example, there is a, you know, pro-public sector, vaguely anti-business sense about it. And obviously some of them are not part of the private sector, so as Eamon said, they have very little direct experience of what all that means, and I fear that can often be true in schools too. I would love it if more entrepreneurs went into schools, and I've often actually spoken to classes in schools about starting their own business, and more teachers, there are a few here tonight, who came to events like this and saw that, you know, there is this big world, Atlas is supporting things, and, you know, he or she has got to be fed and watered and can't be neglected and ignored and despised. And, you know, 85% odd of jobs in the UK are in the private sector. And it's funny how too many people in positions of power sort of forget that. And I do think it is partly for entrepreneurs to step into the breach and the fray and engage with schools and universities and the media and make their pitch. So it needs both sides to engage.
Yes, this turning to the left thing is quite nice, actually. I'm rather enjoying it. Sheldon Wilkie here. Yeah. Okay. There's a microphone for you, Sheldon. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Sheldon Wilkie. Today I had a look at the Global Innovation Index, and it shows Switzerland at number 1 and Sweden at number 2. What are they doing that we're not doing? And the second part of my question is, we want to accede to the CPTPP. What policy initiatives in terms of regulation and tax should we adopt?
I'm sorry to say I don't know what the initials stand for in that.
It's the trade agreement across
right,
the
I see.
Pacific.
Okay, well, I'm all for trade with the rest of the world. What I would say about both Sweden and Switzerland is that they have entrepreneurial cultures, particularly Switzerland, and that they have pretty tax-friendly regimes, particularly Switzerland, and that, you know, they are very good at exporting and seeking out overseas markets and things like that. And, you know, they believe in investing in R&D, and, you know, clearly that can produce results. I think, despite the fact we have, you know, 150 universities and many of the best in the world, our ability to transfer technology is not as good as it should be, given our prowess in that sphere. And as it happens, I used to chair an institution called the Institute of Cancer Research, and we were very good at inventing cancer drugs. And we, some years, had more royalties from our inventions than any other equivalent university in the UK, even though we're minuscule. But so I think having, again, more commercial people inside the ivory towers who are interested in helping the academics exploit their inventions and or work and partner with industry would be a good idea. And I think, you know, there is more tech transfer than there used to be, but we should get much better at it. We have to. And if you think of the fact that essentially Silicon Valley is founded on Stanford University. If Stanford University had not been built there, Silicon Valley wouldn't be there. And, you know, it's been the engine of, you know, much of the world's innovation over the last 50 years. And so exploiting all that ingenuity is vital. And, you know, AstraZeneca with the vaccine and so forth did their bit. But could we do and should we do more? Yes. And should we be up there beating Switzerland? Sure.
I know that your first entrepreneurial inventions, expeditions were when you were at university. But does university sort of teach people to be cautious and careful and not take risks? Or is it that people who don't take risks are the ones that go to university?
Well, it's a good question, isn't it? I think a lot of academics are very cautious by nature. You know, they're tenured often and
yes.
Safe jobs and very juicy pensions and all the rest of it. And the life of a lonely, risk-taking entrepreneur is the exact opposite. But it's unfortunate because obviously technical innovations are the heart of much of the growth engines of any economy. And so somehow that partnership needs to be more fruitful if society is to gain.
Let me get a sense of the mood of the meeting. How many people feel a question welling up inside them? A few here, right. Well, let's start with that person there and then we'll work back, yeah. And then we'll come down here.
I have a more straightforward question for you, Luke. In your experience, do you think that hard work and tenacity trumps creativity and invention?
I think probably it does. Certainly, I would say for more mainstream businesses. I have met an awful lot of entrepreneurs who've grafted away and built, you know, highly successful businesses in a, you know, not particularly innovative sphere, but, you know, very profitable and successful. I think if you want a truly breakthrough business, then creativity and innovation have to play a big part, because I think no breakthrough business ever succeeds if it just does the same as everyone else. But there are endless opportunities. It's doing the same as others in a slightly different location, or slightly better than the others, or what have you, or just being better service, or whatever it is, you know. You don't have to be that much better than the competition to succeed often, I think. The customers are clever at seeking out the best.
Perhaps we should have competition in government. Gentleman there in the middle.
Charles Skinner, sort of slightly retired businessman. Is it not important that we understand the distinction between entrepreneurs, most of whom, in my experience, became entrepreneurs because they didn't have too many other options, and financiers?
Yeah, and I think there are differences. I think it's a continuum, because you could say, well, what about freelancers and entrepreneurs, and what about the self-employed and entrepreneurs? I think entrepreneurs I would class as the people who, you know, start and grow real businesses and aren't involved principally in financial engineering. They're the ones who are growing things organically and adding jobs and building the top line rather than, most financiers, I guess, in the sense I think you mean, are about leverage as much as anything. And so it's who can borrow the most money and time the markets well. And, I think that's not adding as much economic value overall as genuine entrepreneurship, in my opinion.
Further back. Further back. Yeah.
Thank you. My question focuses on your discussion regarding the government being a particular stifler of entrepreneurship. But I was curious what your opinions were on those large companies which were yesterday's innovators but now act as the sort of stifling effect on down the ladder. I particularly referenced the large tech companies which have been particularly active over the last 2 years.
Yeah, I think it's a common path that, what was once a pioneer becomes an oligopoly or a monopoly even, and then, they're mainly engaged in things like litigation and oppressing rivals. It's a very depressing trend, and I think it is one of those occasions where you do actually want the government to intervene to potentially break things up, because, ultimately that can depress innovation, it can reduce choices for consumers, it can hike prices unreasonably, it can allow price gouging, and I don't think it's a sign of a healthy economy. And it's a bit like, if utilities aren't regulated properly, then customers are exploited, and that isn't a good thing. And although I am all in favour of free markets, I think in certain areas there is a requirement for rules and so forth regarding monopolies, because I think they are one of the dark sides of capitalism. Capitalism isn't without its flaws, and that's one of them.
Well, you're in a temple of monopoly, I have to say. built on keeping out the opposition. Charles, that one there by the camera on the other side. Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir, for your eloquent speech. You spoke about the power of insecurity, and we're living in a time when so many people are anxious. Anxiety is the new public mantra. So what I wanted to ask you was whether that anxiety can be honed into entrepreneurship, or if anxious people are lost causes.
Well, I can't pretend I'm not without stress. I would say that stress and anxiety are a necessary requirement about caring for things. If you don't get worked up about something, you don't really care about it. Being too relaxed isn't any good. I think it is the price of ambition to an extent. Now, are all these anxious people, and I agree, it does seem an endemic of anxiety, can it be channeled into starting businesses? I'm not sure, because you need a lot more than just anxiety to start a business. You need, drive and ambition and effort and directed attention and all the rest of it. So I don't think that's necessarily the answer, no, I'm afraid.
Rand stressed the importance of self-confidence, self-esteem in business. Does that chime with you? Are entrepreneurs, do they have sort of self-esteem?
I'm often surprised at how insecure some very successful entrepreneurs I've met have. And it's funny what drives them. I remember seeing a chap who built up a very successful business in selling beds. He was on a panel like this with me, and I asked him what drove him, and he described how he had a much cleverer older brother who went to a very prestigious university and got a first and then became an academic. And he never went to university. And his driving motivation was the fact that he was chippy about his brother. And that's what made him build this big business and become very wealthy and successful.
Sort of self-esteem.
Yeah.
All right, I'll take one from the right-wingers now. Guy there about halfway back. Further, yeah, that's it. I think this will probably be our last one, so you better make it good.
Actually, I want to go back to what we were talking about earlier with education. Do you think then, with the rigid structure that education that it is, schools, high schools, colleges, do you think they can actually accommodate the entrepreneurial spirit of being active and all over the place in innovation and in actually doing things?
Look, there are obviously many entrepreneurs who do perfectly well in school, but I also think there are plenty who, for whatever reason, don't. And they can't abide the structure, they don't thrive in the classroom environment, they're not good at exams, they're not good at academic work, but their skills are different. And I don't think it's a coincidence that academic economists have written, I think, not enough and not insightfully enough about entrepreneurship and their motivations and psychology. It's really hard to understand, and I think if societies could truly work out the entrepreneur DNA and then cultivate them, then and we had whole cohorts of, brilliant entrepreneurs being trained and so forth, then I imagine we would be a much more prosperous society. But it's very difficult. The very nature of them is that they come from anywhere and everywhere, and that their ideas are unpredictable, and that they are mavericks. And that's what makes them both fascinating and maddening, but also successful. And if you study the careers of entrepreneurs, as I have hundreds of them and worked with many, they are not easy to pigeonhole at all. And indeed, I think one of the things that drives them is they don't want to be pigeonholed. And they like being their own bosses and forging their own path. And that's what's exciting and unpredictable about them.
Friends, thank you very much for coming on this cold night. I hope that you'll join us for a stirrup cup back in the room where we started. So let me thank you for coming, and let me thank our sponsor again, Carl Barney. And of course, thank Luke. Luke, in business, you must get an awful lot of government paperwork. And so in order to help you manage that, we thought we might give you a paperweight. This one is, of course, Adam Smith. Thank you very much indeed.